Hey y'all, welcome to Killer Queens, a true crime podcast. I'm your host Torella, and like most millennials, I've always had an obsession with true crime. On KQ, you'll find light true crime stories, millennial hypes and gripes, some adult language, and maybe a special guest here and there. Just like a 90s sleepover, we're just a couple BFFs hanging out, so gather round and let's launch right into it. In September of 1978, Rodney Alcala won the date with Cheryl Bradshaw on the popular show The Dating Game. It was said that his charm and use of innuendo ultimately got him the win. It was also said that this alleged charm was what enabled him to rape and murder at least 8 women. It's believed, though, that he may have killed over 100 women in the 1970s. We do have some trigger warnings here: murder by strangulation, blunt force of child and adult, sexual assault of child and adult. Also just like gross, yucky, ew dudes. Blech. And I want to give a hey girl thanks to Beth for writing this one up. Thank you. And thanks to Elizabeth Decker and Bailey Decker. Are you guys like related? For requesting this. Thank you. There is a movie that was recently released on Netflix based on this case. Anna Kendrick, I believe, produced it, and I know she directed it, and she acted in it. We will talk about that movie more toward the end. I'm going to kind of go into that movie in a little bit more detail at the end. I thought it was a great movie if you want to watch it, but I'll tie into that in a little bit. First, we're just going to go over the case itself. Rodney Alcala was born Rodrigo Jacques Alcala Bulcor. I'm Southern, sorry. On August 23rd, 1943 in San Antonio. The Alcala family moved to Mexico, where they lived for several years until his father abandoned them. After their father left, Alcala's mom moved him and his siblings to Los Angeles, California. When he was 17, Alcala enlisted in the army, but he was discharged in 1964 after what they called a nervous breakdown and a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. I did also read in another place that he fled. So I'm not totally sure if he was like actually I don't think he was like considered AWOL necessarily, but anyway, you might read both just in case. After leaving the military, Alcala attended California State University before transferring to the University of California, LA. He graduated from the latter in 1968 with a degree in fine arts. In the same year, Alcala's first known assault took place. A witness saw Alcala driving off with a young girl and contacted the police. Thank you. Thank you, witness. If you see something, say something. It might not be anything, but listen to what this was, okay? The responding officer found 8-year-old Tali Shapiro alive, but had suffered being beaten and raped. The officer watched as Alcala fled the scene, but was unable to catch him. I have feelings about that. You got to catch that guy, but I mean, what happened, I guess, you know? Alcala fled California and made his way to the East Coast, where he settled in New York, and then he enrolled in New York University, but under an alias, he started going by John Berger. He actually ended up taking a class taught by Roman Polanski, a famous film director, who recently settled a lawsuit where he was accused of sexual assault in 1973. And like, what are the odds that you get Roman Polanski as an instructor? Although the guy that I used to date that I moved to California with there for however many months I lived out there, he went to film school, like Los Angeles Film School. I don't remember the name of it. It was on Sunset. I do remember that. And one of his instructors in his like comedy class was at that time not known at all. And it was the guys from their group was called Mail Order Comedy. But it's the guys who did Workaholics. So Blake, Anders, oh my God, I'm forgetting Adam Devine, Carl, the 4 of them. They were his instructors. And I remember he came home one day, and this was before like smartphones weren't a thing. He came home one day and pulled up on the computer. YouTube was like very new. He pulled up on the computer if you have a chance, I'm sure it's still on there. It was Mail Order Comedy, MAIL Order Comedy. And they did a Sierra Nevada Sausage Fest skit thing on there. It was like a video that they made. And it was so funny. And I was like, oh my gosh, these guys are hilarious or whatever. And then a few years later or whatever, I remember on Comedy Central, we started watching a show called Workaholics. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the guys from Mail Order Comedy or whatever. So anyway, I guess, everybody starts somewhere, but Roman Polanski, I mean, dang. He, of course, used that as that was his dinner party, story. Oh, I once took a class taught by Roman Polanski or whatever. In 1971, Rodney Alcala was added to the FBI's most wanted list, but he was using the alias John Berger to avoid capture. He made his way to New Hampshire, where he worked as a camp counselor at an arts camp. With children. However, several of the girls attending the camp recognized him from the most wanted posters, and they did report him to the camp dean, and the dean contacted the authorities, and then Alcala was arrested that August. So, now remember, this is for the rape and severe beating of the 8-year-old. He was able to plead guilty to the lesser charge of child molestation. Why? And ended up serving only 34 months before being paroled in August of 1974. And he went through some kind of psychological evaluation or whatever, and the psychologist with the jail or whoever was like, yeah, he is not a danger to women and children anymore. I think he's totally fine. The 70s were a wild 70s. Are you okay? Are you okay? Who hurt you? I cannot even count how many cases that we've talked about that happened in the 70s where men were raping and abusing children, many children. And it would be we'll just give him a couple months. We'll let him out early. It's not a violent crime. Y'all, it's not going to get better. I mean, obviously we know more about that now, but that's hard. That's hard to, and I'm sorry, a lesser charge of child molestation? That should not be a lesser charge. What are we doing? Just weeks after being paroled, he was arrested for possession of marijuana while being with a 13-year-old girl. He was put back in prison until 1977. Because of the molestation charge and conviction, Alcala was then a registered sex offender, but despite this, he was able to get a job as a typesetter for the Los Angeles Times in September of 1977. Los Angeles Times? You're a big dog. We should be doing background checks. In 1978, Rodney Alcala was interviewed by the police in connection to the Hillside Strangler killings due to his past conviction of child molestation. However, he was cleared of those murders. I mean, I guess at least somebody's fucking looking at him geez. Later that year in September, Rodney appeared on the show The Dating Game as Bachelor Number 1. According to Wikipedia, The Dating Game is an American television game show that first aired on December 20th, 1965 on ABC. Is there anybody listening to this or watching this who doesn't know The Dating Game? I'm sure there are because that was on TV Land, I think, sometimes when I was younger. But kind of a staple, right? I don't know. It's just funny. The format of the show, if you've never heard of it, Children Gather Round. The format of the show was there would be a bachelorette. She is questioning 3 bachelors and she can't see them. It's kind of like Love is Blind, but not as in depth. And they're on a stage. It's filmed in front of a TV audience. The bachelorette is on the one side. There's a partition. And then the bachelors are on the other side. So obviously we, the TV viewers, and if you're sitting in the audience in the studio, you can see everybody. And so she's asking different questions, and each bachelor either answers every question or she might ask different questions to different bachelors, just depending on the question. And the bachelors are competing for a date with the bachelorette. And so after the questioning is over, she chooses one that she felt like was the winner. And then they get to go on a date. The expenses are paid for by the show. There were instances where the roles were reversed, or there would be celebrities, coworkers, relatives, they had to get like jiggy with it or whatever. At the time of the show, Rodney Alcala had already served time in prison for child molestation and was a registered sex offender, but the show didn't run background checks because why the fuck would they? So he had absolutely no problem getting on. No problem getting on. He was introduced to his bachelorette, Cheryl Bradshaw, as, quote, a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the darkroom at the age 13, fully developed. This show is very sexual innuendo-ish. Just, And obviously they make those things up because his dad took off. So, I don't know. Miss Bradshaw asked him to describe what kind of meal he would be. I think that was the last question. And this was like, I don't want to say iconic, but it was like the most well-known part of the show, this particular episode. But he said, I'm called the banana and I look real good. And she's like, can you go into more detail? And he's like, peel me. And she's like, that's the winner. Look, I wasn't alive in the 70s. Is that what the kids call Riz? I don't know, but it worked on Cheryl. So she chose him. He was the winner. And by all accounts, Rodney Alcala was a good-looking guy. Now, again, I wasn't alive in the 70s. Burt Reynolds from the 70s? Tom Selleck from the 70s? We're talking like top tier. I can appreciate a man in all his glory in the 70s. Rodney Alcala, not my cup of tea. But, maybe if I was a 70s girl, I'd be into it. I don't know. Bush and all. That's how it was. It's not me. I'm not making that up. But his use of charm and innuendo was kind of what won Cheryl over. And I think it really went over well with like the studio audience and the people that were watching too, like the television audience. Now we know he was a creep show. But again, this goes back to John Wayne Gacy and his friend talking to his mom, being like, I can't believe my friend John would do stuff like this. Like, he doesn't look evil. He doesn't seem evil, all that stuff. And she said, baby, whoever told you the devil was ugly? Like, he can't be ugly. He has to be charming. He has to have that like innuendo that kind of makes you wonder. And he looks, good if you're into that sort of thing. And like, whatever. He has to be disarming. He has to look like somebody who is not a criminal. Otherwise, he can't get close to as many victims. If he was walking around with his glasses hanging off the side of his face and, talking about a spaceship and shit, people would be like, I'm out of here. This guy doesn't know what he's like. There's something wrong here. But he's not like that. He's charming. He's disarming. He looks like a clean cut, like regular guy in the 70s or whatever, in bell bottoms and shit. I don't know. But when Cheryl met him face to face after the show, so immediately, like once you pick the winner, they bring him out from the side and they'll bring the other two out so you can see like what you're missing or whatever. But they bring them out and then they stand together and then they're like, oh, you guys won, blah, 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 whatever. All expenses paid, this, that, whatever. And then they'll stand there for a minute. And when he came out, he actually like gave her a hug and I think maybe a kiss on the cheek. They stood there together. They looked happy. She didn't look uncomfortable necessarily in that moment. Doesn't mean she wasn't uncomfortable, but she's obviously on camera, whatever. But then she said that once they got backstage, she felt like he was acting really creepy and she decided she was not going to go out with him. And she said like later in an interview that when she like was talking to him, she felt ill. And she actually like, she could just tell that there was something not right. And so she asked the producers like, is it okay if I don't go out with him? Like, I don't feel comfortable. Like, I don't want to go out with him. And they were like, of course you don't have to go out with him. Like, yeah, that's totally fine. So she didn't go out with him at all. Thank goodness. The following year in 1979, Rodney Alcala was arrested and charged for the murder of 12-year-old Robin Samso, but it took years for his other murders and assaults to come to life. Robin Christine Samso was born on December 13th, 1966 in Washington to Robert Samso Jr. and Marianne Breckeller Samso Fraser Connolly. My goodness, a lot of names. The inscription on her headstone reads, "Our little angel, beloved granddaughter, beloved daughter and sister." Should never have to write that on a headstone, my God. For a child. On June 20th, 1979, Robin left her friend Bridget Wilvert's apartment in Huntington Beach, California. She was riding Bridget's bicycle to go to her ballet class, but she never showed up, and she's now missing. Then on July 2nd, a man named William Pepke, who worked for the Forest Service spraying crew, found Robin's scattered remains in a remote mountain ravine above Sierra Madre. Her skull was separated from her neck, and her lower teeth were fractured in a manner consistent with being hit with a hard object. Her left foot and parts of her hand were missing. A kitchen knife was found nearby with a minute drop of human blood on it, along with a beach towel that had wipe stains of type A blood. And remember, at this time, we didn't have DNA testing, but we could tell the type of blood. There were no articles of clothing found aside from one tennis shoe with the name Robin on it. Her body had been in such an advanced state of decomposition that it was not possible to determine medically her time and cause of death, or whether or not she'd been sexually assaulted. As the investigation into her murder took place, the police learned that shortly before Robin had disappeared, she and Bridget had been accosted on the beach by a strange man. This man had been taking several photos of the girls with their permission, one of which was a carefully posed photo of Robin. Now, these girls are young. They're 12 years old. Parents. I probably think about, well, if you're listening to this, you do too. We think about more scenarios than most people will ever think of or come into contact with, hopefully, obviously. I don't know. I know that this is a technique that at least several serial killers that I know of from around that time would use, 70s and 80s. Like, oh, I'm a photographer. Do you want to be a model? Like, let me get some pictures of you. Let's go back here or there or whatever. I don't know how rampant that would be now, but I do know with the rise of social media and TikTok, like you can take your own pictures, you can post your own videos and stuff like that. But anybody can message them and say, oh, I'm with a talent agency, you know? How about we meet and I get some photos of you and you could be in a magazine or whatever. Like, just really, really, I mean, I wouldn't let them on the internet, but I know that that's not, every parent's choice, and that's fine. It scares me. My kids are not going to be on social media until they're 18, and they're not going to like it, I'm sure, but that's my choice. But just please, talk through these things with them. Make sure that they understand that they should only be messaging with people they personally know. Anybody on the internet can pretend to be anybody. And people like predators like this, they know what they're doing. They know how to disarm their victims. They know how to make themselves look and appear and sound trustworthy. And that's exactly what Rodney did. I'm a photographer. He wasn't a photographer. He was a typesetter. But they don't know that. He's got a nice camera. He looks like a photographer. He can take good pictures. When Jackie Young, an adult known to Bridget, approached, the man quickly made his way away from the two girls. Jackie and Bridget were able to help the police with the composite sketch, and Rodney Alcala's probation officer recognized him from the drawing. Because of his previous conviction for child molestation and his known penchant for photography of children, along with the indications that he frequented the area where Robin's body was found, the police were able to obtain a warrant for his arrest and the ability to search his home and car. So is child molestation a problem now? Because it didn't seem to be a problem at the time. He pled guilty to that, and that seemed like, just plead guilty to this, you'll be out in no time. But now it tells us something about his history. It tells us something about the victims he chooses. It tells us something about his pattern of behavior and what he might go on to do. Because now we've got a murder of a young girl, and now he looks good for it because of child molestation, but before that was no big deal. The amount of time that it takes law enforcement and lawmakers to catch up to violence against women and children is astonishing And it's gross. Fucking gross. And maybe I'm just pissy today, but that's how I feel, okay? Anyway. On July 24th, 1979, Alcala was arrested in his bedroom in Monterey Park and his home was searched. The police found a receipt for a storage locker in Seattle with a date after Robin's murder. With a warrant in place, the Seattle storage locker was searched and the police found cold weather clothing, kitchenware, several photographs and film, and a pair of gold-coated earrings. Rodney Alcala went on trial for the murder of Robin Samso in 1980. Several witnesses testified on both sides, but he was ultimately found guilty. However, in 1984, Alcala appealed his conviction and it was overturned based on the jury having been improperly told about his criminal history. His other reasons were denied for appeal. A second trial for Robin's murder took place in 1986, and Alcala was again found guilty. This is so frustrating because it's like every defendant has the right to a fair trial. The rules should be followed. There shouldn't be overwhelmingly prejudicial evidence admitted in that shouldn't be in like all those things. But it's like, motherfucker, you fucking did this, okay? You did it big fat out loud with your whole chest, right? So like, it just sucks that like he got a new trial. Now he was found guilty still because he fucking did it. But those situations are very frustrating because there definitely are going to be defendants who are guilty, who are abusing that system, which is why it has to be such a stringent system. But that then makes it harder for people who have actual claims of innocence or actual rights that have been violated and all of that, just sucks. This time, U.S. District Judge Stephen V. Wilson of Los Angeles ruled that in the 1986 trial, then Orange County Superior Court Judge Donald A. McCartan, quote, precluded the defense from developing and presenting evidence material to significant issues in the case, according to an article written by Jerry Hicks for the Los Angeles Times. Before Alcala's third trial, you guys, it's just, I still feel astonished as I read it today. Before Alcala's third trial for Robin's murder, there had been several advances in DNA and other crime scene analysis that provided evidence that tied him to several other murders. This motherfucker done fucked around and found out. He sure did. He sure did. This process took so long. His first trial was 1980. His third trial was in 2010. And by then, his DNA tied him to several other murders. You dumb bitch. Anyway. And of course, he had to provide DNA while he was in custody. I mean, the third trial took place in 2010, and Alcala was charged not only with Robin's murder, but for the assaults and strangulations of 4 women in California that took place in the 1970s. First, there was Jill Barkholm, who he murdered in November of 1977. Jill Terry Barkholm was born on December 18th, 1958 to Maurice and Joyce Barkholm in Oneida, New York? I'm not sure. She grew up on Park Avenue with her parents, her 5 sisters, and 5 brothers. She was the 5th child in the family. As a teenager, Jill liked to sing, play trumpet. She enjoyed roller skating and loved playing at being a disc jockey. She attended Oneida High School, I'm going to go with that, where she had been set to graduate in 1977, but she was a free spirit and decided to leave home on her own and set off for California. On November 10th, 1977, Rodney Alcala raped Jill, smashing her face with a rock and then strangling her to death with the leg of a pair of pants. Her body was found in the Hollywood Hills. She was 18 years old. In December of 1977, Alcala raped and murdered 27-year-old Georgia Wixted. Georgia Marie Wixted was born on December 22nd, 1949 in New York and was the middle child of 3. Her father, Robert, passed away in 1960, and she and her siblings were raised by their widowed single mother. Georgia and her brother, Michael, often took care of their younger sister, Anne. As a teenager, Georgia underwent 2 surgeries for tumor removals, and the care that she received during those hospital stays was what made her determined to become a nurse herself. Georgia made that dream come true, and while living in California, she was a nurse at Centinela Hospital. On December 16, 1977, Georgia was found nude in her Malibu apartment. She had been raped, strangled, and beat with a bat. She was 27 years old. Next was Charlotte Lamb, who was murdered in June of 1978. Charlotte Lee, who went by Suge Lamb, was born on June 26, 1945, to Edward and Frances. One source says she was born in Lexington, Kentucky. Another said the family lived in Ohio, so it's possible she was born in one, moved to another, but you may see both if you are looking this up. She was the fourth child of 8. Charlotte liked to sing, paint, and sometimes she made her own skirts and dresses. Her nickname from her family was Suge, and her profession in adulthood was that of a legal secretary. On Charlotte's 32nd birthday, June 26, 1978, her sister Celia called her several times, but she got no answer. It was weeks later that Charlotte's family learned that she had been found nude in the laundry room of her apartment building 2 days before her birthday. She had been raped and strangled to death. Why did nobody call her family? That's very confusing to me. It's not like nobody found her for weeks. They found her 2 days before her family was trying to get a hold of her. What are we doing, guys? The fourth murder that they connected Rodney to was that of Jill Parenteau. Jill Marie Parenteau was born on October 17, 1957 in Glendale, California. She had long brown hair and a big smile. Her friend Catherine Franco said that Jill was smart and funny, but she could be shy and reserved with those who didn't know her well. Catherine said that Jill and her friends did regular girlfriend things like sharing recipes, shopping, wondering where life would take them, talking about the future, that kind of thing. In summer of 1979, Catherine said that she and Jill went out to a local bar called the Handlebar Saloon, which was a regular spot that Rodney Alcala frequented. The girls met Alcala briefly, but he made little impression on them. Catherine said they really didn't give him a whole lot of thought. On June 13th, 1979, Jill's nude body was found inside her apartment, and she had also been raped and strangled. At trial, Jill's sister, Deidre Ann, told the court, quote, "I'll never forget what it was like to see my mother, who always held her emotions in control, sob uncontrollably over losing her youngest daughter." She also said that Alcala, quote, "is truly a devil who does not belong on this earth." Amen. During the 2010 trial, where he was accused of 5 sexual assaults and murders, Rodney Alcala decided to represent himself. Please do. Please do. One of the main pieces of evidence against him were the gold earrings that had been found in the storage locker that had been determined to belong to Robin Samso. In his defense, he played clips from the dating game to prove that he had already been wearing gold earrings in 1978, but it absolutely did not land with the jury. Okay, well, different gold earrings look different, and earrings that are gonna, these are a 12-year-old girl's earrings, and I'm positive they're not exactly the same as the ones you wore in the dating game. Was he just trying to be like, I was on TV, look at how charming I am? I think that's probably what he was doing. Whatever. In February of 2010, Rodney Alcala was found guilty of all 5 murders and was sentenced to death in March of that year. What the fuck did you think you were going to bring to overcome DNA evidence from 5 murders now, dude? Not just 1, 5. The fact that he thought he could do that, that tells you all you need to know, right? Also, in March of 2010, the police departments in Huntington Beach, California, and New York City released 120 of Alcala's photographs in hopes that the public would be able to help identify the women and children. There were approximately 900 other photos that could not be made public because, according to the police, they were too sexually explicit. Do they not know how to bleep stuff out? Bleep stuff out. But if you've got a face that you can at least use, I don't know. Anyway. In the first few weeks that followed, 21 women came forward to identify themselves, and there were at least 6 families they believed that recognized loved ones that had disappeared and had never been found. While Rodney Alcala was on death row, it was discovered that he was responsible for the murders of Cornelia Crilley and Ellen Hoover in New York. Cornelia Michael Crilley was born on April 21st, 1948 in Queens, New York to John and Catherine. She had 4 siblings, 2 sisters, Catherine and Mary, and 2 brothers, Michael and Jack. Cornelia was hired as a flight attendant for TWA and moved into her first apartment in the spring of 1971 in Manhattan. However, it wasn't long after she settled in that she was found dead in her apartment after being raped and strangled with her own stockings. She is the first known victim of Rodney Alcala. Ellen Jane Hoover, victim that passed away, because we know that his first assault was of an 8-year-old. Ellen Jane Hoover was born on August 2nd, 1953, in Los Angeles to Herman Douglas, H.D., and Yvonne Schwartz. She had a brother named Ian. Ellen was a gifted pianist with aspirations to become an orchestra conductor. Ellen's cousin described her as being, quote, almost heartbreakingly sweet. After college, Ellen was 23 years old and living in New York. She met a man who said that he was a photographer and that graduated from UCLA with a degree in fine arts. She jotted his name down in her datebook and moved on. A close friend of Ellen's recalled that this man, John Berger, was pressuring her to have lunch with him, and she was just too nice to say no. Ellen went on the lunch date and never returned. Her bones were found at the old Rockefeller estate in Westchester County, New York, which was a favorite photo shoot location of Alcala's. In 2012, Alcala pleaded guilty to the murders of Cornelia and Ellen and received a sentence of 25 years to life in prison, though he never served that time because he was already in custody in California. In 2016, Rodney Alcala was again charged with murder. Christine Ruth Thornton was born on November 7th, 1948 in Hancock, Michigan to Beatrice and James Thornton. She attended St. Joseph and St. Patrick Elementary School, then Hancock High School, then college at Michigan Tech University. She had 4 siblings, Nancy, Marianne, Dan, and Kathy. Christine was described as a free-spirited, adventurous soul who loved playing classical music, the outdoors, sailing, and traveling. It was said of her, quote, she was equally beautiful, intelligent, and fearlessly embraced all life had to offer. At the time of her death, Christine was a resident of Antonio, Texas, but was killed in Sweetwater County, Wyoming at 28 years old. According to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, she was 6 months pregnant, but that didn't show up anywhere else necessarily, so not sure. And then the prosecutors didn't even extradite him for trial. He's already on death row. Police believe Alcala was responsible for the murders of Pamela Lamson in the San Francisco Bay Area in the fall of 1977. However, the DNA that was collected at the crime scene was too degraded to test, so he was never charged. While on death row, California's death penalty was the subject of several lawsuits, reforms, and ballot initiatives. And in March of 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom issued a moratorium on planned executions. Alcala was spared, however, his sentence was not amended. On July 24th, 2021, Rodney Alcala died of unspecified natural causes while hospitalized in California's San Joaquin Valley at 77 years old. There are 2 survivors of Rodney Alcala that have gone on to live full lives. First is Tali Shapiro, who we mentioned earlier. Tali was 8 years old when Alcala kidnapped, raped, and beat her before being apprehended by the police. When the police arrived at Alcala's home, he answered the door naked and had rage in his eyes, according to Officer Christopher Camacho. Tali was found unresponsive on the floor in a pool of blood with a metal bar on her neck. The officers believed she was dead, but when Officer Camacho removed the bar from her neck, they heard her breathing. Alcala escaped through his back door, but left his ID so they were able to identify him. As we know, it took 2 years for him to be caught. Y'all, how the fuck did he get away? He was fucking naked. You had him at the door. Every time my husband watches football and one of the wide receivers or somebody misses it, he's like, gotta catch that ball. You know, when they touch it, but they miss it, they drop it or whatever. You gotta catch that ball. You gotta catch that ball. You gotta catch that pedophile. You gotta catch him. You can't let him slip through your hands like that. Get your sticky gloves on. I don't give a fuck. Jesus. 2 years. In Alcala's 2010 sentencing hearing, Tali told the court that she had over 27 stitches in the back of her head. She said that she never looked at him during the sentencing. Alcala, who was representing himself, didn't question her, but apologized for his despicable behavior. No shit. His apology made her sick to her stomach. After Alcala's death, she said the planet is a better place without him. That's for sure. I did read that Tali Shapiro said, the officers had to make a decision between saving me and chasing him. So I do understand, but It's so awful. He killed literally everybody after that. It's just, awful, but they saved her. Then there was Morgan Rowan, who was 13 years old in 1965 when she first encountered Alcala in the parking lot of a teen nightclub with her friends. Morgan has stated that he was tall, attractive, charismatic, and she never saw that as dangerous. She said that he kept looking over at her and her friends and smiling. Alcala pulled her into an alley behind the club and slammed her head into the wall, and she fell unconscious. He pushed a large industrial dumpster on top of her, and she screamed for help. The owner of the club and his wife came over and helped her. However, 3 years later, Morgan ran into him again. Morgan and her family were getting ready to move to New York, and before they left, she had a going-away celebration on the Sunset Strip. Alcala was there, and Morgan felt very creeped out when she saw him. She sat in the back seat with her friends and was fearful when he got into the driver's seat. He drove Morgan and her friends to his house where he gave them marijuana. While her friends were distracted, Alcala took Morgan into his bedroom. He took off his belt and wrapped it around his fist. She tried to be brave and tell him no, but he punched her between the eyes as hard as he could. Her head hit the wall and she fell to her knees, but she was still conscious. Alcala then used a knife to cut the tie of her blouse around her neck, and she could feel blood running down her chest. He then shoved his belt into her mouth, blocking her airway so she couldn't breathe. Then he bound her wrist with a necktie. He punched her in the stomach, took his knife to cut off the rest of her clothes, and raped her. Her friends eventually realized that Morgan and Alcala were missing, so they began pounding on the bedroom door. Mike, one of Morgan's friends, broke into the window of the bedroom, and when he saw Alcala, he stood up covered in blood and said, "Take her." Morgan ran out of the house and into the path of a moving car with her friends behind her. The couple driving the car drove the teenagers to safety. Morgan told her story in her book, Stolen from Sunset, the true story of surviving the dating game killer that came out in 2023. She later wrote a letter to Tali via Facebook apologizing for not reporting Alcala sooner. Tali told her that there was nothing to forgive. It wasn't her fault. Morgan said, "Tali saying she forgave me changed everything. It was definitely a huge step to my recovery, and the two are now very close friends." There is another survivor that I read about named Monique Hoy. And if you watch Woman of the Hour, she is the inspiration for the character Amy, which we'll talk about in just a second. But she has not, that I can tell, she has not been active in the media since then. There's no like you can find interviews with Tali Shapiro and Morgan Rowan recently, but I couldn't find anything from Monique Hoy. Rodney Alcala's exact death toll is unknown, but some authorities believe he murdered around 50 people, while others think it may be as high as 130. According to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation website, authorities suspected Alcala of or linked him to other murders in Los Angeles and Marin counties in California, Seattle, Washington, New York, New Hampshire, and Arizona. Wow. While incarcerated in 1994, Alcala wrote a book, You, the Jury, where he argued his innocence. Just, are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? There have been some different films and documentaries about Rodney Alcala. There was a biographical film about his life called Dating Game Killer that aired on Investigation Discovery in December of 2017. In November of 2022, a 3-part TV documentary was released. And then most recently in October of 2024, Woman of the Hour was released on Netflix that stars Anna Kendrick, who also directed the film playing Cheryl Bradshaw. So I wanted to go over just briefly the movie. There will be spoilers, okay? So if you have not seen it and you want to and you don't want to know what happens in it, then stop listening now. But I did watch it. It was really good. I enjoyed it. I thought it was really well made. I thought the message in it was really well done. And the movie is not a historically necessarily accurate representation of the case. Characters' names are changed. Cheryl Bradshaw's name is the same, but she's the main character. And really, his encounter with Cheryl Bradshaw was super brief. And then she went on to live a very, very private life after that. So pretty much everything that is portrayed about Cheryl Bradshaw, other than just her being on the dating show, is fictionalized or speculated or whatever. Cheryl Bradshaw in the movie is an aspiring actress who, because of her refusal to do like nudity scenes and stuff like that, she's portrayed as a very intelligent woman who society wants to just be fun, kind of airheaded, be sexier, whatever for film. And she's not really into that. And so her acting career is not going that great. She's not getting that many jobs, all that kind of stuff. There's not really any evidence that she was an actress at all. So again, this is just something that I am assuming that Anna Kendrick there is pulling from her experience as an actress and some of her experiences as a woman and an actress and all of that. So she does go on the dating show, and she did refuse to go out with him after. In the movie, they go out directly after. They go out to dinner, or not really dinner, like go out for drinks. And at first it's okay, but then he starts getting really creepy. And he's like, let's get another drink. And she's like, no, I don't want to do that. So all of that is, any interaction that she had with him after the show is completely fictionalized. It's not accurate, but they put that in there. In the movie, one of the other bachelors warns Cheryl about him because they'd had some conversations off camera, like during commercial breaks and stuff. And he felt really creeped out by him and all of these things. And in reality, he didn't warn her personally, but later in an interview, he did say he was like a really creepy dude. Like, yeah. There is also a character in the movie, and I forget her name now. I think it might be Laura. She's a character who is actually sitting in the audience while they're on the dating show, and they're filming of the dating show. And she recognizes Rodney because she had a friend who'd been raped and murdered. And the last person that she saw her friend with was Rodney, and she felt like that's the person that had killed her. And so she sees him there, and she's getting very uncomfortable, and she's trying to tell her boyfriend who's there with her, I know this guy, he killed my friend. She tries to report it there. She talks to the security guard there. And she's like, this is really important. Somebody has to warn this woman, and like somebody needs to know this. And he's like, oh yeah, go up and meet with, and I forget the name he gave. And so she waits around for a while, and finally a janitor comes in, and she's like, I'm supposed to be meeting whoever. And he's like, are you serious? Because that's me. Like, I don't hold meetings with people. So obviously she wasn't taken seriously. Her character is meant to represent all of the times that Rodney slipped through the cracks, that women did report him, that women did say something and it was overlooked or not taken seriously. Laura represents women not being taken seriously as a character. And it still happens today, of course. At the end, there is a teenager that he picks up under the guise of taking pictures. Her name is Amy. She's a runaway. He takes her out to this area where he starts taking pictures of her. He ends up beating her. He strangles her, but then she wakes up next to him and he's crying. And she realizes that she's been brutally assaulted. Now, Rodney Alcala's his MO was that he would beat, rape, strangle, and then he'd bring you back. And then he'd torture you and do it again. So she was in the in-between. He'd not brought her back yet. So she wakes up, she sees him crying, and in an effort to survive, she's like, hey, are you okay? Is everything okay? And so she tells him she wants to continue the relationship. She's like, hey, can you please don't tell anybody that this happened? I would just be so embarrassed. Like, what do you want to do? Do you want to go hang out? Do you want to go get some food or something? And he's like, okay, yeah. And so he takes her in the car and he drives her. And in the movie, he goes into the gas station to go to the bathroom. She makes a break for it. She calls the police. He gets arrested right then. They pick him up. She sees him get arrested. She did, in fact, report him, but later, she did convince him to not kill her by saying that she wanted to continue the relationship. And she did testify. There is on-screen text at the end of the movie that this person did testify in his trial, and that's what helped him get convicted. But she didn't testify until 2010. And this was at a trial to determine whether he should get the death penalty for the rape and murder of Robin Samso and the other 4 women that by that time the DNA had connected him to. But she did testify in court. She did tell her story. And she did what she had to do to survive. And this film really, really focuses on that. There's a situation with Cheryl Bradshaw with a guy that lives in her building who I guess is like an acting coach or whatever. They go out for drinks one night. They're talking. He obviously wants to bang her. She obviously doesn't want to bang him. And then when he's like, okay, well, let's get another drink. And she's like, oh, I've got a lot to do. I've got early morning or whatever. He immediately just gets cold and like very angry. And so she eventually is like, no, okay, yeah, let's like have another drink or whatever. And it's really a comment on the things that women have to pay attention to around men. You know, we have to have one earbud in if we're walking around in our neighborhood. You can't have both. You have to be able to hear if somebody comes up behind you. You have to have your keys out in a parking lot or pepper spray or whatever. But even in this kind of situation where this is a man that's known to her, she knows him, she feels pretty comfortable around him. She was joking and having a good time before that, but she refuses in advance and he gets angry. Natalie Holloway. She lost her life for it. So what do women do? They learn to adapt and you learn to appease. So Cheryl's character in this movie says, actually, you know what? Let's have another drink. And then they end up sleeping together that night. And she's uncomfortable. Now, would she have necessarily lost her life if she'd said no? No, not necessarily. This man may not have been dangerous per se. But it's not just loss of life that we have to think about. We have to think about loss of opportunities. We have to think about loss of income. This is her acting coach. Maybe he doesn't get her hooked up with jobs after this. Maybe he gives her the cold shoulder. He's really the only person that this character knows in LA at that point. She doesn't really have a whole lot of other friends. She had moved there for this acting thing. So loss of friendship, loss of opportunities, loss of connection, loss of help. He's a guy that lives in her building. If she needs something heavy lifted or needs help with this or that or whatever, she could call him, but now she can't because fuck her. She didn't want to have sex with him, so why the fuck should he help her, right? So like there are so many things that we have to think about as women if you do reject something that you're not comfortable with. Jobs. This happens at jobs. Your boss makes an advance. You don't want to lose the promotion. You don't want to lose your job. You don't want to. Okay, so like maybe you do something you're not comfortable with. And the question of why didn't you say no? Why didn't you report it? Why didn't you this, that, or whatever? That's the wrong question. The question should be, why do men harm? Why do men do this? And why does it anger men so much? Not all men, but why does it anger men so much for a woman to reject a sexual advance? To the point that if you say, no, thank you, to, a guy comes up and like, oh, you're beautiful. I'd love to take you out sometime. Can I buy you a drink or whatever? And you're like, no, thank you, but no. And they're like, yeah, okay, you fucking bitch, and start calling you names like you're fucking ugly anyway. I've had that happen to me. I was just beautiful a second ago. Now I'm so fucking ugly. You don't want to deal with me. This movie is a comment on that. It is a comment on, from a woman's perspective, the things that you have to do, the situations that you have to endure, and the chameleon that you have to become so that you're not in more danger than you would be otherwise. To protect the male ego and need to be desired or need for their advances to be accepted or whatever. And make no mistake, Rodney Alcala did not rape children and women because he would have a hard time getting dates or anything like that. That wasn't a problem for him. He did it for power. All that was for power. So anyway, if you want to watch the movie, I think you should. It's good. I thought it was really well done. You're not going to be watching it for absolute historical accuracy, but it was very well done, and it showed, I think, the fear that a lot of women live in, even if it's not necessarily fear of loss of life. And I thought it was really, really well done. So if you want to check it out, totally do that. And that's it for today. I love you guys. Let me know what you think, and I will catch you next time. Bye. If you like this episode, be sure to like this episode and follow the show so that you never miss out on new episodes. Get in on the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. You can find us at Killer Queens Pod, or you can join our Facebook discussion group at Killer Queens Podcast, where we discuss cases covered on the show and all things 90s. If you want to submit a case to be covered on the show, visit killerqueenspodcast.com/case submission and just complete the form. And if we cover the case, we'll give you a shout out on the show. Lilas.